Hey, my beloveds, how are you doing? Hope you're doing well. I want to talk to you today about credentials, about training and education, and obviously we know it's important to be honest about it, but we know that, but not everybody does that. And you know what? It can catch up with you, okay? So I just want to share with you a little story. So, there was a job that I had. It was a pretty high level job, and I was there for a few years. And I gave my notice that I was going to leave. And one of the things that my boss wanted me to do before I left was to help hire the person who was coming after me. My boss knew that I knew what would be needed for the job, and that my input would be really valuable for them to help find someone to replace me. So that's what I did. My boss sent me resumes, and I participated in the interviews as well. And this one person, nice person, nothing wrong with them or nothing like that. But when I looked at their resume, they mentioned that they had a certification. And I looked at it and I was like, that's interesting, because what they listed as a certification was not a certification. It was a certificate, not a certification. They're different. Now, in the field that I was working in, HR, we know the difference between a certification and a certificate. So for this person at this level to name this opportunity or this training they had on their resume as a certification when it wasn't, they knew better. It's like, really, they knew better. And I knew for a fact that that was a certificate and not a certification, because I had the same one. Okay, I had the same one. And when I looked at the time period that they had received theirs, it was the same time period I received mine. So I'm telling you, it was really interesting. So I mentioned this to my boss because, we were looking at resumes, and he said, okay, what do you think about these? And I mentioned that to him. And I said, during the interview, I'm going to ask about that. And he said, okay. So we interviewed this person, and I asked about it. And I said, oh, can you tell me more about these credentials here under your certificates and certifications and whatnot? And then they went and explained. And again, they called it a certification. So they said it on their resume, and then in the interview, they called it a certification. I said, oh, are you sure that's a certification? They said, yes. I said, well, from my understanding, it's a certificate because A, B, C, and D. And they're like, oh, yeah, you're right. My mistake. And then they corrected themselves after I corrected them. But I was just like, okay, and so that was a little bit of an issue. And then after the interview, my supervisor, my boss, talked to me about it, and he was uncomfortable with that, with the fact that they called it a certification when it was a certificate. But it wasn't just that. It was that, well, if they were going to kind of label something that's incorrect, label something in a way that's incorrect, what else are they glossing over and hoping that we don't see? What else are they kind of massaging to make themselves look better? What else? And you know what? There could have been nothing else. There could have been nothing else. That could have been the only thing, but we didn't know that. And by the fact that they did this, it made, a red flag go up. And so the rest of the person's credentials were pretty okay, but that just left a mar in it that we just didn't move forward with that person. That person could have ended up being fine, and that could have been the only, thing that they, kind of messed up a bit, but it was enough to kind of get them out of the running. So you don't want that to happen to you, okay? You don't want that to happen to you. Credentials matter. There are times where if someone has, let's say you have two people with a bachelor's degree, one has a master's and another has a certification, but maybe more experience, they would be really competitive. So it's not always about just having a master's degree or something beyond a bachelor's. It can be about, do you have relevant certifications? And then how do you showcase those certifications on your resume? For example, If you have a master's, you don't necessarily put that after your name. The bugs are hanging out here today. You don't put that after your name on your resume. You don't say, your name and then, master's of whatever. If you have a PhD, that's appropriate. If you have an MD, that's appropriate. If you have a JD, that's appropriate. If you have a certification like a PMP, you're a license that's relevant to the work you're applying to, licensed clinical social worker, for example, or a global career development facilitator, a PHR, SPHR. Those kind of things are very relevant, very well known employment credentials. Those you definitely can put next to your name, but I see some people adding like all these letters after their name. No one knows what they are. And then one of the biggest things that I have seen as other people's pet peeves is, yes, putting a master's after your name. It just doesn't, it's not usual. It's not the norm, and it sticks out in a way that's kind of weird. And it just doesn't land well for most people, for most recruiters and most managers. So if you have a master's, that's fine, but don't put, your name, comma, MA or MS or whatever. Some people do it with an MBA, and actually that's not really most appropriate either. Talk about your degrees that you have in the education section in your resume, and the summary section of your resume too is fine, but if you have a master's, be careful about putting that next to your name. Since I mentioned the MBA, again, it's not the most appropriate, but from my perspective, and that's when I say not most appropriate, that's like on the broader level. When I see resumes that have MBA, it doesn't bother me as much because it's kind of similar to me as the way we do JDs. So JD, that's a type of very specific master's degree, really technically focused. And I view MBAs that way as well. So if someone has MBA after their name, that doesn't, that's not awkward for me, just like a JD is not awkward. But any kind of master's that's not like a very specific kind of master's like an MBA or JD, if it's like a master's in anthropology or something like that, then you don't need to put MS or whatever. It just doesn't land well for recruiters and managers all the time. So if you are a recruiter or manager, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Feel free to put them in the comments. But again, from my perspective, that's the way that I've seen it, and many of the colleagues that I work with have viewed that. The other thing I'll mention in terms of being honest on your resume, for example, if you put that you graduated from University of Maryland, for example, but you actually went to school for 2 years at a community college, and you transferred your credits, and you got a degree from University of Maryland, then that's fine. You're not lying. You're not being dishonest. You earned your degree from University of Maryland. Even though you went to a 2-year school, your credits transferred, and that's fine. However, if you, let's say if you went to college for 4 years, and you put, I went to college from this year to that year, and then you have a degree next to it, but you really didn't get a degree. You just went to school for 4 years. It doesn't mean you have a degree. So just make sure that you're being very specific. You can say that you went to school for X amount of years, but don't put the degree if you didn't really earn it, okay? You can put credits towards whatever degree, but don't make it seem like you actually got that degree, okay? So it's really important to be honest. Another thing I'll mention, certain titles are good to put next to your name on the top of your resume, like Reverend, Doctor. But if you're going to put Doctor, don't put PhD or MD after it. You don't need to double up, so choose which one you're going to do and stick with that. I have a lot of certifications and certificates and whatnot. When it comes to my certifications, because that's another thing. Certifications are not like certificates. A certificate is like a training class or a training series that you take, and you get a certificate. It shows that you've gotten the education and training for whatever that topic is, and then it's done, okay? It's like someone going to law school. They get their degree in law, but you have to be certified to actually practice law, which is a separate thing, okay? That's equivalent to like a certification. So just because you have the education or a certificate, that means you went through the classes and you passed, but it doesn't mean that you're at that second level where you have a certification that has been verified, like with an exam or something like that. So in general, a certification is more is more prestigious per se than just a certificate, because a certification, you have to prove that you know that information by an exam or something like that. And also many times a certification will have some experience component to it, and it's really holistic, and it really does a good job of being able to distinguish people who really know what they're doing in practice and in knowledge, not just in knowledge, or that they were able to get a certain grade to pass something. So certifications also require a maintenance. Many times when you get a certification, it doesn't just last forever, it can expire. So a certification may need to be renewed every 2 years, 3 years, or whatnot, and you have to do continuing education. So having a certification, to maintain it costs time, money, and you have to stay up to date in whatever it is that certification is. But a certificate, you get it once, you have it. You don't have to maintain it per se. You don't have to whatever. You just have it. If you got that certificate 10 years ago, there's no continuing education or nothing like that. So that is why certifications tend to be more prestigious than a certificate per se. Certificates time out because, something you got 20 years ago may not be so relevant now. But if you have a certification, it's going to always be relevant because they usually require certain upkeep. So I have certain certifications. I go to conferences. I have to, get my continuing education credits to maintain them rather, because I have a few. And so it keeps me up to date in all that I do. It's not like a degree or a certificate that I took classes and then it's done, and then I may never revisit it again, or I may never work in that field again, so that's something to keep in mind. Final thing that I want to share with you, I said more than I meant to in this video, but the last thing I want to share with you is I have like maybe 3 or 4 or something certifications, right? 2, 3, or 4, and 3, I think. So anyway, have employers ask me to verify them? Rarely do employers actually ask me to verify. So that's really interesting. I work so hard to keep my credentials up, and few ask me for them. Now, one reason may be is, for example, one of my certifications, there's something called Credly. That's Credly, Credly. I love Credly because you can get something called a digital badge. So if you have a certain certification, you can verify it through Credly, and you can put a link in your signature line that if someone clicks on it, they can see proof that you have whatever certification you've connected to that. So that's really important. Those digital badges can be really helpful. It's easier than having to print out or send your electronic copy of your certification. It's just so much easier just to have that quick link. So Credly is a really good place to, if you have any kind of credential, go to credly.com and have your credential verified through that, and then put that on your signature line as a link, and that is really good to really get a lot of bang for your buck when it comes to your signature line on your email. People can see that certification. And employers can verify it very easily without having to ask for it. The other thing is, if they do ask for it and you don't have it, not good. Obviously not good. So don't be that person, okay? Make sure that if you're listing your credentials on your resume, on your website, on whatever, that they're up to date. Because even though not everyone asks for them, if someone does, you want to have them, and you want to be able to prove that, you're saying that you have what you have. So be transparent about it. If you have a certification or a credential that's been expired, just say, show that it's been expired on your resume. The fact that you had it still looks good, even though it is currently expired. Okay, that's enough for now. Like I said more than I meant to say today, but I hope you learned something. Hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions, leave them in the chat. I'm happy to answer them. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.